Well, good morning. Welcome to Oshkosh if this is your first day. My name is Larry Bothe and I'm here to talk about saving time and money in learning to fly. And boy, it just gets more expensive every year, and I know that. Let me move this up just a little bit higher. Okay. I apologize. I don't want to stand up to do this. I have a problem with my right hip. If I stand up for like a whole hour, I'm pretty uncomfortable. So please cut me a little slack and let me sit here and do it from a seated position. We're glad to have you here, and I'd like to ask you please put your cell phones on vibrate or silent. And at the end, the last slide has all my contact information on it. You can take as many pictures as you want, but this presentation is already recorded and it's on the EAA webinar website page, so you can go back and look at it. I think there's also a link at the end that you can capture the slides, and if you get really desperate, you can just send me an email and I'll send you the slides, because I do this for fun. It's not copyrighted or anything. And I'm happy to do it, I enjoy it, and I'm happy to share. So whatever you'd like to do, it's good by me. If you want to use it at some event at your home airport, feel free. All right, let's see. So I'm not famous, so I have to introduce myself. It's not like being in Forum 7. So I'm Larry Bothe. I'm from Seymour, Indiana, and if you don't know where that is, it's about halfway between Indianapolis and Louisville, Kentucky. I have just shy of 9,000 hours. I'm a Wright Brothers Master Pilot. I'm a Master CFI. I'm rated in a whole bunch of kinds of airplanes and machines, gliders and helicopters. For 15 years, I was a designated pilot examiner for the FAA. I've taught hundreds of people to fly, ran an FBO for a few years, owned several airplanes, and I presently own the Champ in the picture. So that's probably more than you want to know about me. I already said my contact information will be on the last slide, and I'd like you to hold questions till the end of the presentation, because I get bogged down in them if I take them in the middle. And there'll be plenty of time, and if we run out of time, I'll stay in the back and talk to anybody as long as you want to talk, except I want to attend a presentation. I want to learn about Garmin Pilot, because I'm switching to it from ForeFlight, and Garmin has a new subscriber forum at 1 o'clock I want to go to. That's a long time from now. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how hard is it really to learn to fly, and what do you really have to know or do? How much does it really cost all in? Because there's a bunch of hidden costs. Learning to fly is quite expensive these days. So I want to tell you the true story about what it costs. In spite of all the money, though, the thing that people run into in flight training and have trouble completing is they run out of time. They just don't have enough time to do what it takes to learn everything you need to know these days. How about ground school? Yeah, is there ground school? Of course there is. So how do you accomplish ground school? So then we'll wrap up with some do's and don'ts about taking flight training, and then I'll do questions and answers. So how hard is it to learn to fly? About as hard as making this slide changer work. Okay. People who sell flight training say, oh, everyone can learn to fly. It's just as easy as driving a car. Well, guess what? That's not true, because flying happens in 3 dimensions. Once you add the up-down part, it's a little harder than learning to drive a car. However, anyone that can drive a car and not regularly have accidents can learn to fly. So it's not all that hard. The navigation is different, than two-dimension, right, driving around on roads, because wind doesn't affect cars, but wind blows airplanes around. So that makes the navigation more difficult. And while no one likes to drive in terrible weather, you know, it's not too bad, but airplanes are really affected by weather. So it's another thing that makes it more difficult. It's much easier to learn to fly if you make the right choices up front in deciding where to learn to fly, what kind of equipment to learn in. And finally, as I started out, it's really hard if you don't have enough time. A lot of people think maybe flying is going to require a high level of mathematical skills, and that's simply not true. In the old days, we used an E6B, it's a rotary slide rule in reality, to do the calculations necessary for flying. So even 50 years ago, you didn't have to be real good at math. But these days, guess what? Everything happens on an app on your phone. So the math stuff is just taken out of it. It's nice if you can understand time, speed, distance problems like you learned in 4th grade, but your cell phone calculates it anyway. So no, you don't have to know a lot about math. Here's what you do need though. A lot of people these days try to live with just their cell phone, and they don't have a desktop computer. They do their email on their cell phone, they do searches on their cell phone, look stuff up, and that's fine as far as it goes. But in learning to fly, you really need either a laptop or a desktop computer, because a cell phone screen is just too darn small. I know you can do gestures and expand things, but man, it's just hard. And you need a printer. The FAA has you printing temporary certificates, and it's just really hard if you don't have a real computer set up. And while you could go to your local library and use theirs, that's way inconvenient to get your car to go someplace. This guy's nodding his head, he's probably tried it. So, anyway, those are a few of the things that you need to be concerned about in learning to fly. People hate to be tested. Some people have real testophobia. I'm telling you, I've seen people quit flying because they couldn't stand the thought of being tested, even after they spent a lot of money on lessons. But it's not as strange as you might think, or uncommon. But at any rate, there are actually 3 tests that you're required to take by the FAA in order to get a pilot certificate. The first one is administered by your flight instructor. They're required to give you a pre-solo written quiz, and they're required to go over it with you. Now, there's no cost to do that except you have to pay the instructor. Instructors want to get paid for everything, right? So, and it's not possible to fail, because they usually give it to you as an open book thing and say, take this quiz home and do it, and do as best that you can, and then when you come into the airport again, we'll review it. So the instructor's required to review it with you, and anything that you didn't know, the instructor has to explain it to you. So that's the first level of testing, but that's not really possible to fail. If you screw it up badly, it just takes longer to review it with the instructor. Okay, next thing though is the official FAA, they now call it the knowledge test, but old timers call it the written test. It's the same thing. When I learned to fly, we did it with a pencil and paper, and that's why it was called a written test. But now it's done at a computer center, and the FAA farms it out to authorized testing sites, and they charge like $175 to administer the test for you. So that's one of those many costs that nobody mentions. It's multiple choice, 60 questions. You have to get 70% correct, so you have to get 42 of them right, or you can only miss 18, however you want to say that. But Um, so you have to do that, and you can't take the final test called the practical test until you have passed the knowledge test. Now, people put off taking the knowledge test because it's necessary to study for it. And they really screw themselves up because they wait right till the end because they don't want to mess with it. So they finish their flying lessons and their skill level in flying the airplane is pretty high. And then they, oh crap, I have to take this knowledge test. Well, I got to go study for it. So now they get into doing an online course and it takes 2, 3, 4 weeks for them to get through it. And you know what? It costs a fortune because they have to keep flying to keep their skill level high enough to pass the test while they're studying to pass the flight part, the flying part, while they're studying to do the knowledge part. So don't wait till the end to do the knowledge test. You don't want to do it first thing though, because you don't yet know the special jargon of aviation. And so, like if you work your way up, it takes 10 or 12 hours for most people to solo. By the time you solo, you should start working on doing an online course for the knowledge test, and when you finish the online course, go take it. Get it out of the way. And so finally then, the last level of testing is the practical test. And I'm going to talk about the practical test here tomorrow and Thursday in a 2-part presentation. But basically there's an oral quizzing part and a flight part. And that costs these days like $800. When I was doing the most I ever charged was half that. But that's how it is these days. So those are the 3 levels of testing that are required to get a pilot certificate. In addition, if you go to a big flight school, they often have what they call stage checks, where they have you fly with their chief flight instructor before you move on to different phases. Like before you solo, you have a phase check. Before you fly cross country, they make you have a phase check. Before they'll sign you off to take the practical test, you have a phase check. So if you're at a big flight school, you might run into the stage checks, but those are not required by the FAA. That's school policy. Okay, I've mentioned time a bunch of times. Now let's talk a little more about time and what happens with it. Flying, but first, this is the basic concept. When you learn to fly, chances are it's not your first priority, right? You probably have a job, you have a family, and those things take priority, earning a living. So already, the flying part is not the highest priority, but you need lots of time. So let's break down a flying lesson. So you're going to have to drive to the airport. Let's say that takes you half hour. Then you have to do a pre-flight inspection of the airplane. So that takes 15 minutes. You're going to do a pre-lesson briefing with your instructor about what you're going to do that day. That's another 15 minutes. So then you're going to fly around for about an hour. And after you finish with the flying around, you land and your instructor gives you a post-flight debriefing, and that's important. You should get a post-flight debriefing every time. And because not only do you talk about what you just did, but your instructor will tell you what you're going to do in the next lesson, which gives you a chance to study up on it at home, and then you don't have to have the instructor spend as much time talking to you, which you have to pay for. Okay. So then you got to drive home. So if you add all that up, you're already at 2 hours and 45 minutes for your theoretical 1-hour flying lesson. And if the airplane lives in a hangar, so now you got another half hour, which was 15 minutes getting it out and 15 minutes putting it back in. And God forbid you should go to lunch in there somewhere. You're at 6, you're up around 6 hours. So these 1-hour lessons aren't an hour, so plan on it that way. Now, besides going uh, going to the airport and taking lessons, you need to study at home. You can't get it if you don't, or it'll take you forever. But you need to study at home. Why this thing sags? I don't get it. Try that for a little while. Anyway, you need to plan on studying at home. You need to plan on, first of all, you're going to have to prepare for this knowledge test I talked about. Most people buy an online course. Online course takes a total of 30 or 40 hours to work your way through all the lessons and take the sample tests and all the stuff that's necessary. So there's 30 or 40 hours right there. You're going to get interested in aviation, so suddenly you'll be reading AOPA Pilot Magazine, you'll be watching different aviation subjects, you'll be searching on things in Google, and so you'll mess around like 5 hours a week doing that. And you should study before you go to the airport each time. If they tell you you're going to learn crosswind landings or whatever, you should read up on how to do them. Because that way your instructor doesn't have to tell you, you don't have to pay your instructor for it. So there's lots of time involved, so you have to face that. Don't be surprised you're disappointed. How much does it cost? Lots. Here's what's in it. Thankfully, inflation in general has slowed way up, right? So this is information from last year, but it's essentially current. We now have a new system of aircraft certifications called Mosaic, Modernization of Special Airworthiness Certification. What they did was they made a bunch of older but larger airplanes, included them in airplanes that sport pilots can fly. Sport pilots don't have to have a medical certificate. So now you can fly airplanes, common training airplanes like Skyhawks and Piper Warriors and 140s, and actually airplanes up through a 182 you can fly on your driver's license now, effective last October. So what's this do? Those airplanes are all over the place, and so now there's suddenly a lot more training airplanes available that you can rent less expensively, but that's relative. They're still expensive. So now, if you want to start at sport pilot, which doesn't require as much training, it's much easier to train for sport pilot than it was a year ago. And so you can save money by doing that. There are some advantages and disadvantages to sport pilot. You're not required as much training, so you save time, you save money, and the good news is you can step up from sport pilot to private pilot, although you have to do more testing. You don't have to pay for a medical certificate, though, for the examination. Larger airplanes are much more comfortable to be in. Some of these sport airplanes are really tiny, and if you have a few extra pounds, they're uncomfortable to fly in. And no night training is required, so you save that money. So if you can accept the limitations of sport pilot, then you might want to start there. And so what are the sport pilot limitations? Okay, well, first of all, the minimum training time is only 20 hours. But no one can learn it in 20 hours, or very few geniuses can learn it in 20 hours. Typical for sport pilot is about 35 hours. And you might say, oh, Chief, private pilot's only 40 hours, why bother with that? Well, that's the minimum for private, but the average time to get a private pilot certificate these days is actually 72 hours. All this really low minimums that the FAA accepts have been around for a very long time. The 40 hours for private pilot was established in 1949 when people were flying Piper Cubs off grass fields. And now you have to know a whole lot more to get a pilot certificate, but the FAA never changed the minimum. So, sport pilot, you can, even though the airplane can have 4 seats, you can only take 1 passenger. And initially you can't fly at night, but you can take extra training later and do that. And with Mosaic now, you can also add complex, which means retractable landing gear, and you can also add high performance, which means engines exceeding 200 horsepower. But you can't get an instrument rating on a sport pilot certificate. If you want to fly on instruments, you have to go to private. And as I said, moving up to private requires another knowledge test, and it requires another $800 check ride. Okay, so what's it cost? All in for sport pilot is about $11,000. But by the way, all in for private pilot is about $15,000. So there's a big saving to starting at sport pilot and worrying about private later. So I'll show you what makes up these costs so you can see where this $11,000 comes from, and then we can talk about how to save some of that money by doing certain things. So here we go. Let's see. So first of all, of the 20 hours required for sport pilot, 15 has to be with a certified flight instructor, so you have to rent the instructor. And then you have to pay for 20 hours of airplanes, and airplanes these days rent for about $175 an hour. And the fuel's included, that's good news. So if you quickly do some arithmetic, you can figure out that you ought to be able to learn to fly then for $4,400. But right, the answer is no, not really. That's only in theory. The reality is that nobody can learn to fly in 20 hours, or very few people. And I already said it takes more like 35 hours for sport pilot, and for private pilots, I said the national average is 72 hours, which is true, but that's for people that start and stop, and then they have to get back into it again, and they have to take a lot of lessons over. If you work on private pilot and you stick with it and don't start and stop, you can learn in 55 hours, say, is reasonable. So here's some of the individual costs for sport pilot. I said, rent the airplane now for the realistic 35 hours, and you're a little over $6 grand. Oh, but there's sales tax on aircraft rental. Almost all states charge sales tax on equipment rental, and airplanes are just another form of equipment. So there's another $430. You only required 15 hours of CFI time, but the truth is you're going to have more like 30. So the CFI costs you $1,800. That's for flying. In spite of taking the ground school course, you're still going to need ground instruction and explanation from your flight instructor, which will set you back another $230. The fee to take the knowledge test we already mentioned is $175. Practical test is $800. You're going to end up buying books, charts, supplies, miscellaneous stuff for $300. And most people buy a headset, right, with a boom microphone. And the entry-level ones are around $300. And it's not hard to spend $1,000. So the dropout, and all that, by the way, adds up to $10,760. That's pretty close to 11 grand. some additional facts. The dropout rate historically for people that start taking pilot's lessons has been very high. It's up around 70%. However, now that Mosaic is here and you can fly bigger airplanes and do it under sport pilot rules and requirements, we're very hopeful that this dropout rate will come down, but it's too soon to tell yet. It's not yet a year old. I don't have any data. And as I said, in spite of all the money, the real reason people stop taking pilot's lessons is they run out of time. Now, costs can really vary greatly. Maybe for sport pilot, it ranges from a low of about 11,000 up to a high of about 13,000. One of the single thing that governs how much in total it costs to learn to fly is how often you take lessons. You want to get yourself in a position where you have the time and the money to take 2 lessons a week to schedule. Now, we all know that if you schedule 2 lessons a week, once in a while you won't be able to make one of them. The weather will be terrible, you'll be out of town on business, family things, you'll miss one once in a while. That's okay, but if you try to take 2 lessons a week, you'll generally get at least one of them in, and then you're never more than 1 full week between lessons. Then you don't forget things. Then you don't have to take lessons over. That's what runs flight training way up, is people take a lesson, a month later they're back at the airport, they forgot half of what they learned, and the instructor's teaching it over again. The instructor's happy, he or she's getting paid again, right? And the flight school's equally happy to rent you the airplane, but your wallet isn't happy. So don't try to take lessons if you don't have enough time, because you'll end up paying double. Okay, I beat that up enough. What else affects cost? Where you take lessons is important. If you live near a big city and you go like closer to the city and learn at a big airport, it's going to cost you a lot more money, because building rentals and fuel and everything, the overhead for the flight schools at big city airports are real high. Better you should go out in the country and learn to fly. Now, it doesn't make any sense to drive, an hour and 15 minutes each way to get to an airport to save $10 an hour, because now you're even making the time thing worse. So don't do that. But if you have a choice of going to a bigger airport or a smaller airport, generally you'll save money at a smaller airport. The kind of airplane you take training in is important. Modern airplanes all have now what are called glass cockpits. They don't have round instruments anymore, they have computer screens. And they're very appealing and kind of whoop-de-doo. But you know what? Those airplanes are really expensive, so they rent for a much higher hourly rental rate. They don't make any better trainer. You can just as soon learn in an airplane that's got old analog round gauges for like a third less, and you can worry about that fancy Cirrus when your ship comes in. So my advice is don't fly fancy new airplanes, they cost too much to rent. And finally, instructors, you may or may not know this now, flight instruction is the bottom rung in an aviation career. People go to school, learn to fly, get commercial, get an instrument. Next thing they do is train for a flight instructor, and they get it. And then, if they're any good, their flight school will hire them back. But they don't get paid very well. And so and the key is flight instructors only get paid when they're instructing. It's not a salary job. So instructors want to follow you around and so they can bill every minute so they can earn more money. And if you're not watching, they'll follow you into the restroom. So I'm being facetious, but the point is, you're better off to find an older, somebody, maybe a retired airline pilot or something that's already financially secure, because they're not worried about every last penny anymore. They're instructing because it's kind of fun. And so you'll get a lot more for your dollar if you find a mature retired instructor than you will from a young person that's starting. Okay, and we also talked about don't drive 1,000,000 miles trying to save a couple of bucks, because the time will tell you. Okay, so can we save any of this money, or am I going to have to pay 11 grand for this, or what? Okay, so first of all this equipment that you've seen, the headsets and books and charts and all this, do you have some relative in your family or friend of the family that used to fly but doesn't fly anymore? The technology hasn't changed. See if you can get them to give you their equipment or loan it to you and use that. How about, you have any friends that have airplanes that don't fly much? It's really hard on airplanes to own one and just leave it parked in the hangar. People want their airplanes flown. So if you have a friend that has an airplane that mostly is a hangar queen, maybe you can talk them into letting you fly the airplane to take instruction. Runs the cost of insurance up though, so you'll have to pay the extra insurance on it. Clearly you gotta buy the gas. But it's way better than renting the airplane outright from a flight school. So consider that. If you have a little financial wherewithal, it's very common for 2 or 3 people to chip in and just simply buy an airplane and share it to learn to fly, and when you finish, just sell the airplane. You own it for a year or so, if you take care of it, you get all your money back, and you're not paying the flight school's profit. Flight simulators, computer-based flight simulation, are really good to learn procedures. And you say, well, geez, I don't have all that computer equipment. You don't have to. Join your local EAA chapter. EAA chapters have flight simulators, and they usually charge a few bucks an hour to use the flight simulators because they have expenses of keeping it current. But use that, boy, you can save a ton of money in learning the procedure in a simulator before you go out and do it in an airplane. There are scholarships all over the place for flight training. Most of them are small though, so you have to apply for a bunch of them and hope you get awarded some of them. So it just doesn't fall on you. You have to go and make an effort. Again, EAA chapter is a good place to start for that. EAA chapters award a couple of scholarships, full ride scholarships. They're called Ray Scholars, every year to a couple members. So go after a Ray scholarship, but there are many, many others. The 99s, Women in Aviation International, AOPA has flight training scholarships, and bunches of others. Google's your friend. Search them down, apply for them. Do you have some skill that you might be able to barter for flying lessons? For example, I'm a terrible trade rat. I put new radios in my Champ about 2 years ago, and first of all, I bartered to get the radio, and then the installer at my local airport wanted a tail dragger radio. I said, install a radio in my airplane. I'll teach you to fly tail draggers. I went to Florida with my wife for 10 days. I came back, it was parked in my hangar, the radios worked perfectly, and the paperwork was done. I flew with Jimmy 3 or 4 hours in my Champ, signed him off for a tail dragger, everybody was happy. No money changed hands. So if you have some skill you can trade, do that. Some flight schools offer flight training at a discount. It's called block time. You buy like 10 hours of airplane up front, so it's $175 an hour. It's like $1,750, but then they'll give you the 11th hour free. Well, if you do that 3 or 4 times during the year you're learning to fly, suddenly your rate of return on that tiny investment is really high. It's like 40%. So it's really a good deal to do that. But I want to warn you, you will run into flight school offerings where they'll say, just give us $9,999 up front. We'll teach you to fly for everything, soup to nuts, examiner's fees, everything. Don't do it. Many flight schools are badly undercapitalized, and their airplanes, they don't own them. The bank really owns them. They don't own the building they're in, they lease it. And it's really hard to make money in the flight school business. And they have a nasty habit of going bankrupt. And if you paid all this money up front and they go out, your money is gone, because the secure creditors like the bank, they get theirs off the top. By the time they get down to unsecured creditors, there's no money left. So I don't encourage people to do these, pay for an entire flight program up front. I think it's bad news. I already said don't take lessons in a fancy new airplane. They cost too much money to rent. There's all sorts of publications that you can buy, but FAA has many of them online for free. And you can download a PDF file, you can print them if you want, but you'll have to buy a ream of paper and 2 or 3 ink cartridges, but it still beats heck out of having to pay for them. Cheapest place to buy a paper chart, if you want one, is my pilot store. They sell them delivered for like $9. 40s gets like $13.50, so there's a pretty dramatic difference in terms of percentage. You're going to need a headset. Ask for it for a birthday present. In other words, figure out ways to get stuff. Join a flying club. Many people band together and buy airplanes and then share them. Like there'll be a 10-member flying club, and they each owns a tent. So, but they're not for profit. It's just for the benefit of the members. And so the rental rate is really cheap. So if you can join a flying club to get the airplane cheap. You can look into the Civil Air Patrol for young people. They have a program called Cadet Wings. So Civil Air Patrol teaches people to fly if you can put up with their rules and quasi-military organization. Okay, so there's some ways that you can save money. There's typical, some of the stuff that you can buy from the FAA or beg and borrow from your uncle, whatever you can do. Ground school options. So you're going to have to learn the information to pass the knowledge test. So most people, these just simply do it online. But you have to have some self-discipline. Buying the test doesn't get you the knowledge. Sitting down in front of the computer and actually taking the lessons gets you the knowledge. So if you're not good at that, maybe that's not the best thing. But the neat thing is you can do the lessons on your schedule. You gotta have a quiet place at home. If you have 3 or 4 young kids running around hollering all the time, probably won't work. But at any rate, the cost of an online course is in the $300 range. There are all sorts of choices out there. King Schools, Sporties, Gleim, and a couple dozen others. I happen to like one called Gold Seal. Last time I looked at, they wanted like $229, and I'm registered with them, so you can do that. But they're all okay. None of them are, that I know of, are bad. So whatever you like. But if you don't think you can do it at home, then there are other things. There are weekend cram courses, which are probably the second most popular. Aviation Seminars runs these things every weekend in fairly big cities cost was $479. You go in there, spend all day Saturday and all day Sunday, and they just cram it down your throat. If you do it that way, and that's a good way. If you just get out of your house and go take the thing for a weekend, you're done. But then, Monday, go take the test. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people pay all this money for this cram course, and they give you lots of study materials and stuff, and then they say, well, gee, before I go take the test, I'm just going to have to review this material a little more before I go. But of course they get busy and they don't review the material, and in reality what happens is they don't gain more knowledge because they don't get around to reviewing. They forget what they got in the cram course over the weekend, and they have a heck of a time passing the test, or maybe they fail. So don't do that. Don't worry about getting an especially good grade. Remember, I said 70% is passing. Doesn't do a darn thing for you to get a 96. So all you need to do is pass and get it behind you. Less common these days is adult evening education courses. Back in the day, they used to do a lot of this stuff. A community college would have a private pilot course that would meet once a week for 10 weeks, 3 hours in the evening, and they were very effective, and I used to teach it. But they've kind of gotten away from doing that because now everybody does online stuff. You can, on your own, buy books and just create your own course, study it at home, and go take the test. But that's really hard because you're in effect like creating your own course. But it's very cost effective. You can do it for about $100. But most people don't do well trying to do themselves. And the last thing is not cost effective at all, but if you just have loads of money, you can just get your flight instructor and say, how about you teach me in the evening? Okay, so that's going to be 30 hours at $60 an hour, so suddenly it's an $1,800 ordeal. Okay, here's some do's and don'ts, which is kind of a summary. First of all, do things in the right order. Take an introductory lesson before you do anything else to make sure that you really want to learn to fly. Don't start by saying, well, ground school doesn't cost much. I can afford the $230 for that online course. I'll do that first. That makes the ground school part really hard because you have no background for it, because you haven't flown yet. Do get your student pilot certificate right away. The FAA blows hot and cold about how long it takes them to process things. So student pilot certificates are free, but you have to apply, and the FAA has to process it, and there's paperwork, etc. So get that right away, because you can't solo until you have a student pilot certificate. You can take lessons, by the way, but you can't fly the airplane alone. And then I already said, don't wait till right at the end to take the knowledge test, because you'll be spending lots of money keeping your flying proficiency up while you learn the knowledge part. So I already talked about, be sure you plan to have enough time and have some idea where the money's coming from so you can take 2 lessons a week. If you're a young person, I see young people want to learn to fly in their senior year in high school. I don't recommend that. Seniors these days are really busy. They're involved in sports, there's all these social activities, they have a senior prom, they're taking final tests, they're applying to college, they're doing college visits, and oh yeah, they're going to have extra time to learn to fly. No, it doesn't work. So my recommendation in that case is get your high school diploma, graduate, and then learn to fly in the summer between high school and college. You'll have time then. Don't take lessons real close to a big city. We already went through that. Oh, and buy yourself a wristwatch. A wristwatch is a pilot tool. And you say, yeah, but I have my cell phone. It tells perfect time. I'm sure that it does, but they don't work with a flip in the airplane, because you go to look at your cell phone in the airplane, you set it down, falls on the floor. You have to land the airplane to pick it up. You can't reach it after it falls on the floor. You need it fixed to your wrist. So get yourself a wristwatch whether you like them or not. I said it's okay to buy block time, but don't pay the full price of an entire pilot course up front. Learn to fly in a simple, older airplane. It's easier to do. And if possible, fly with an older, seasoned instructor. Oh, and once in a while, you'll see a really cheap rental rate. Now, I said airplanes rent for 175 bucks an hour, roughly. You'll see, $99 an hour. You'll, wow, that's a bargain. Oh, they forgot to tell you that that place doesn't include the fuel, but you're required to fill it up when you bring it back, and it eats up all the savings. It's just a component. The $175 version includes the fuel. Here's things you should do. Join both EAA, that sponsors me being here. Join the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. Both organizations cost, I don't know, 50 or 60 bucks a year these days, but they have a ton of useful information on their websites, so they're worth joining. And I said you can watch my Pass Your Check Ride presentations tomorrow and Thursday, or you can go online to EAA Video and log in and just search on my last name and all the stuff comes up. They have it recorded. Finally, my contact information is next, and now that you know who I am, you can call me. And with that then, the question is, who has questions? Oh, we have a question too. Let me turn this mic on. This one's still on. I'll come to you. Because I can't hear with all this noise. I wear hearing aids. What's your question?
Okay, Larry, so you mentioned ground school and the FAA knowledge test, but holding up the ground school to the start. Is the ground school test different than the FAA? Would you do one before the other?
Okay, you need to take some form of ground training to learn to gain the knowledge to pass the FAA knowledge test. So you're doing the ground training to pass that test. Does that answer your question? Okay, who else? Who's over here while I'm standing? No. Where else? Who else has a question? Yes, please.
At what point, if at any point, is a medical required even for a sport pilot?
No point. Oh, okay. All right, so this is a fun point. I said sport pilots can fly at night if they take additional training and get an instructor's endorsement in their logbook. That's true. But in order to fly at night, you have to get a medical. I don't think that's going to last very long, by the way. EAA and AOPA will beat the FAA up their mouth. They shouldn't have done that, because what they're after is colorblind, right? You have to have good color differentiation to be a pilot, because they use at night. Airplanes have colored lights on them and they mean something. You have to be able to tell them apart. So right now they do that, but it ought to be a simple colorblind test. It shouldn't be a full-blown medical. Who else? Yes, please. Not good. Okay, the question was, I talked about not being too long between taking lessons because you forget stuff. So this gentleman's saying, well, that's all well and good. I take all these lessons and I get my pilot certificate, but I don't fly much. What about that? And I said my answer was not good. You really need to fly. I have a lot of time, and if I don't fly for a couple of months, I get rusty. So I go out and practice some takeoffs and landings, and you know, it's back there. I just bring the skill forward. And insurance companies hate people that don't fly much. So you should fly. I fly about 50 hours a year total now. I used to fly 200 or 300. Jim, how many hours you fly a year now?
50.
Hey, so he's at 50. Jim still works. He hasn't learned to retire yet. So that, you know, 50 hours or so is pretty good. That keeps your skills up. 25 is not bad, but these people, and there are lots of them, that only fly like 6 hours a year. And guys own airplanes, and they have to have annual inspections. They bring them in. They haven't flown since the last annual inspection. I do a fundraiser for a museum every year, and we borrow airplanes and do airplane rides to raise money. I get guys loan me their airplanes, and the only time on their airplane from the last year to this year is the time that 4 hours that we put on the airplane at the fundraiser the previous year. And these people just keep paying hangar rent, insurance, annual inspection. Doesn't make any sense. Who else? Yeah. Yeah, getting sport first now with Mosaic is a really good idea. It didn't used to be. But now that you can fly the bigger airplanes, and you still can't, you only take one other person, but now, guess what? You can take baggage, throw golf clubs in there, skis, you know, suitcases. So, and it saves a lot of money if you start at sport. And then if you say, well, gee, I really want to get an instrument rating because I want to be able to fly in bad weather, well, then you just move up to private, which is pretty easy to do. So starting at sport is a very good idea since last October when this Mosaic thing became effective. Who else has a question? Over here. I did that on one of the slides. The whole thing, the airplanes rent for less money. You need way less hours, so you don't have to rent the airplane for as many hours. You don't have to pay the instructor for as many hours. So it just all combined, it comes out to a lot cheaper. Private these days costs like $15,000 all in, and sport costs about $11,000. So it's like $4,000 cheaper to do it, start at the sport level. Go to private later. Almost no instrument training. Private requires like 3 hours, sport requires 1. No night training at all is required. And generally you just don't have to have as much solo time. The cross-country requirements less. It's just everything is reduced for sport pilot. So together it costs less money. For private, yeah, 3 hours of instrument training is required. Got to be in your logbook. The examiner's going to look for it. If it's not there, you get sent home. It's a requirement. And sport pilot, I think, is 1 hour. Who else? And again, sir. No spin training. No spin training is required at all. They took it out. They kept killing people requiring spin training. Only for certified flight instructor, you have to have spin training. I offer it to all private pilots, and mostly I get turned down. Maybe later.
Anybody else?
Yes, please. Okay, her question is, so sort of like what this gentleman said, after you get your certificate, I was saying you have to fly to keep your skills up, right? She said, what's the requirement, which is a different question, a legal question. The answer is all pilots, me included, everyone, has to have a flight review with a certified flight instructor, but not an examiner. Every 2 years, you have to show that you haven't forgotten how to fly. And that's it. Who else has a question? Yes, please.
All right, so to jump up from the sport pilot mosaic to private, let's say you enjoy sport for a few years and you want to jump up to private. Is it just the difference of about that 4,000 and extra time and extra training, or would it be like you spend 11,000 now and then it's going to be maybe 6,000 because you have to do this extra school?
Okay, so the gentleman wanted to know, if you get sport initially and then 3 or 4 years down the road you want to go up to private, would it cost just the 4,000 or a lot more? The answer is it'll cost less, because you will have been flying during those 3 or 4 hours, so you'll already have all the cross-country time, right? So all you have to do is fill in the gaps. You have to get the 3 hours of instrument training, the 3 hours of night training, that's 6, and probably another, because the maneuvers are the same. So you have to review them and then go take the test. So it might cost you a couple grand to do it, and then you're going to pay for the lousy test, right? $800. Okay, who else? Over here.
Would you ever recommend a Part 141 flight school over a Part 61 flight school? And why?
Well, now you're going to make me explain what that means. Okay, he asked if I would recommend a Part 141 flight school over a Part 61 flight school. What's that mean? Okay, there are some flight schools that are certified to do training at a higher level on slightly reduced times because they have a curriculum that's certified and approved by the FAA. And they've made a real effort to get this status. It doesn't matter much. I did a Part 141 school to get the instrument rating back in the day, and I did it in 2 long weekends. They really have their act together. 141 schools are real good if you just want to go away to school and learn real fast and you have them all money up front. That works. But their hourly rates are quite high, but they're very effective, so the amount of time is less. That's about all I can tell you. Anybody else? Okay then. Thank you very much for coming this morning. Come back and see me tomorrow, and we'll talk about preparing for the practical test, also known as the check ride. We're going to talk about the oral portion tomorrow, and then we're going to talk about how to pass the flight portion on Thursday. Thanks.